Remember what I said about earlier about considering where the fish are going to be? There's so much water in front of me, I wouldn't possibly have the time to lead everywhere. I've got to decide in advance where I'm going to put my baits for the night. As I've said before, I'm having one in the right-hand corner, I'm having one across towards the weed bed, and I'm having one close in. I need to lead each of those three areas to make sure those areas have got enough clear spots to allow me to present the bait. There's no point me leading everywhere, otherwise I'm wasting time. I certainly can't put a bait in every single position. Let's start off by leading against the far weed bed. Simple cast. Felt the lead thump the bottom. Now what you do, turn the bail arm over, feel the rod tighten up to it. What you're doing is drawing that lead back along the bottom. You can feel that inching. Pulled into a bit of weed, clear spot. When the weed is very thick, you will not be able to move the rod back at all. It's not too bad at all there. You can feel the lead jarring in the weed, gone solid there. What that tells me is that tight against the weed it's clear, a rod length off the weed I'm into solid weed. I'm going to have to be very careful then when I'm casting out. I've got to drop tight against the weed. You see here, lead dropping down. You're using your hands, the rod tip and the line to tell you what's on the bottom. Quite happy with that. I know exactly what's against that spot. That tells me what is against that spot. Second spot I'm going to lead against is right in the corner there, a hole in the pads. Looks nice and clear from here, but I wonder what it's like in real life. Now I don't need to do an overarm cast here, it's only a short underarm rod. Clear as a bell. You can tell when it's clear because your lead thumps the bottom. Yeah, very clear. What you're looking for is that lead to actually thump the bottom. When it thumps the bottom, you'll get a resounding thump down the line, which is transmitted to your hands and tells you that you've got a lovely clear spot there. So I know I've got a clear spot right in the middle of the pads. And let's try this close-in rod now. Again, it's only a small lob, so we don't need to do an overarm cast. Feather it down, feel it. Not quite as much as a thump. Again, the rod tip bent over. Obviously a bit of silt there, a bit of weed. Not quite as clear. As you can see, I've not brought back any weed on the lead. If there was thick weed growth, the weed would be actually solid round there, but it isn't. There's also no brown mud or clay, so I'm obviously dropping into silty area rather than clay. Quite a few people have said that coated leads are perhaps not the best leads to use for plumbing, and I agree with them. If you use a grey lead, then that will actually show what is on the bottom. If there's clay or silt, it will darken up and mark. So an old scored lead is certainly worth trying. I know from this swim, though, that these are 3 good areas to fish. Let's make sure we put them to good effect. Right, this is my last chance before I start casting out my baited end tackles. On these short sessions, you can't afford to keep recasting every 10 minutes. You can't afford to put patches of bait here, there and everywhere. When you've decided that you're going to put your bait in a certain area and you've put the ground bait round it, or the boilies, or the particles, or whatever, to then decide that you're going to put your bait on the far margin or to the left-hand side, means that you've got patches of bait all over the swim. The more patches of bait in your swim, the more chance that the carp are going to find those patch rather than your hook bait. You're cutting your chances down. So before you actually start casting out your baited end tackles, be absolutely sure that those are the spots. Are those the spots the carp are going to come into tonight? They may well be there now, but will they be there in 2 hours, 3 hours or 4 hours, or will they be moving away? I know that's easy for me to say, and I know it only comes from experience, but be absolutely convinced in your mind that those fish will be there tonight or when you are fishing. I'm sure those are the spots for me tonight, so I'm going to move on to setting up the shelter. Normally I'm a great advocate of putting in the rods first and setting up the shelter second. The problem with this swim is that we've got extensive areas of heavy weed. There's a large weed bed in the middle, there's lilies to my left and lilies to my right. It would be absolutely pointless putting the rods in first and then finding I had to set the shelter further back from the rods than I wanted. I want those rods and the shelter next to each other so that when I get a take in the middle of the night, yes, I am that confident, I'll be able to leap straight out of my shelter, pull into the fish and land the fish as soon as possible. The last thing I want to be having to do is run 5 or 10 yards to my rods. So I'm going to set the shelter up first and set the rods next to the shelter. The shelter I'm using is the Fox Ultra 50 shelter. It really doesn't matter what shelter you use as long as it's one that's not one of these huge ones. You want one that will actually fit into any swim, that will look after you and your tackle, will keep you waterproof and dry and blends in with the surroundings. Some of these very large tents are all right for fishing abroad, but when you're fishing in small cramped swims, I've known people actually not pick a swim because they can't get the tent in there. Absolute waste of time. You want a tent that will fit in anywhere, and this is the one. And there we have the shelter. Out of harm's way, there's no way that the carp cruising past are going to see me. I can be straight on my rods and pull into them. It's not in my way and it doesn't stand out like one of these great big igloos. Well happy with this. Having got my shelter into position, I obviously need to get my rods into position then. I'm using the Fox Micron DXR buzzers mounted on the Jule bar. Rock solid, no chance of movement at all. I'll be fishing 2 rods tight to the right. I want the rods in there and I don't want that to move at all. If that is to turn over or fall, it'll cost me a fish and it may cost me a rod. So that is rock solid. I then get the rod over my shoulder and sort out the position I want that to be in. Normally I like to have my rod tips quite low, but because I'm having to fish over the pads, I'm just going to have a bit of height on that. That's about the angle there. Again, I get my rear sticks and find the position. Remember, we want the Velcro on the rod to match up with the Velcro on the rear butt grips. Rock solid ground, but because you can get pressure with the Jule bars, you can actually push them in quite easily. When you've got them in a bit, always move your rod out the way, because if the ground goes soft and those go straight in, you'll end up cracking your rod. You can see there. We then have a solid setup. Screw those round. There is no way now, even on the most violent of takes, that my rod system is going to move. The rod will clip with the Velcro on there and there. On the hardest of takes, that's not going to move. It's stopped by the Velcro, but easy for the angler to lift it straight out. Great little idea and essential when you're fishing in snags. Right, let's get the rest of the rods ready. To complement the audible indication system, and that's your buzzer, I need a visual indication system as well, which is my monkey climbers or hangers or swingers. If you look at the floor here, grass, dirt, debris. I don't want my indicators to get caught in that, so I use what is known as a rod map. You actually can't buy these anymore, but you can certainly make them easily enough. All you need, thick piece of carpet or whatever, little clip in each corner and a turn down tent peg. Now I know quite a few people laugh at this when they see it. When you think about it, what a jolly good idea. When that's down there, pegged in securely, then there's no way dirt can splash up onto your indicators, your visual swingers. Absolutely brilliant. So few people use these, and yet it'll actually cost your fish. If your indicator system gets covered in grime, or this gets solid and won't move, then you'll miss a take and you could lose your rod. So make one of these, very easy. Now onto the visual side. Now, in today's carp world, there are hundreds, believe it or not, of different visual indicators. Monkey climbers, swingers, hangers, springers, whatever. I tend to just use one of two, and that's either the Fox swing spring, which is in effect a swinger, which can be converted to a rigid arm springer. Again, you can see what my favourite colour is. It's this green. I use, for the sake of superstition, I always use green. Very easy. Clips into there, screws in, and all you do is line it up. We'll talk a little bit later about how to set these up, but as you can see, you don't need to take these off your buzzer. All you do is screw them in. If I was fishing at very close range, I would use these simple hangers, and again, just clips on there and hang down. But I'm fishing at about 20 or 30 yards, so I'm preferring to use this swinger with more of a balance weight on it. Both are excellent ideas. I'll set all three up ready for fishing. Remember what I said earlier about being careful when you unzip your rod bags? It's absolutely essential when you're talking about the rods that you're going to fish with. Any line catch on there will ruin it. Carefully undo it. As you can see, it's so much easier nowadays. We don't need to re-tie the rigs each and every week. Just a question of leaving the rig on, folding your rod in half and undoing it. Much simpler. No need to thread anti-tangle tubing. Just thread the rods together, and again, be very careful. Check for dirt, the end of each spigot, nice and clean. Put them together. Again, make sure the line's not twisted anywhere and nice and smooth to run. Always be careful that you lock these up carefully, smoothly down, so you don't cross thread. They need to be solid. I've seen actually people fishing and the handles fall off. Absolutely no need for that. And here's something that will save you a lot of lost fish in the years to come. As you see, the last, or you could call it the first 12 inches, are sheathed in anti-tangle tubing, a lead. You cannot see the knot at all. So what happens when your knot is moving? You can't see it. By simply pulling that out, you can actually examine the knot. As you can see from this knot, I only tied them last night, so it doesn't matter. There's nothing wrong with that. After each and every fishing session, I'd always be tempted to cut the line off and retie the knot. It only takes a minute or two. Also, just push that back. Just check the line in your fingers. No problem at all there. There's a hard plastic inner, and that actually can grate against your line. There's no problem. So retie the swivel. Make sure the line goes in nice and smoothly and securely, and pop it into place. And don't forget, when you're using an abrasion resistant line like Berkeley XT, to also coat it in rig glue. Always remember that when you actually do cut your swivel from your hook length and from your main line, that it will actually undo the twist, because every time you cast out, your line twists. And while the swivel is on there, although it swivels like that, it actually doesn't swivel properly in the water, and line twist builds up on your line, and that actually can cause your line to fail. By simply snipping off your swivel, it takes a line twist out, and again, that can save your fish. Just a little tip I've picked up. Right, we've got the rods out of the rod cases now. The next thing is to make a few practice casts. Now, the last thing I want to do is tie a presentation to that, have 2 casts and end up in the lilies. Very silly. Each person has their own casting style. I've seen some tremendous casters in my day. Alan Parbury, Alan Partridge and Andy Little are all excellent casters. And believe it or not, they all have different styles. When you're fishing at long range, say over 100 yards, style and accuracy becomes very, very difficult. Unless you're a good carp angler, fishing at over 100 yards is very difficult indeed. I always try to fish as close in as possible because it makes the casting easier. I don't pretend to have a brilliant casting action, but I'm usually quite accurate. So the first thing you need to do is have a few practice casts just to see where that lead's going to drop. Now to do those practice casts, the last thing you want to do is catch your other rods. So get your other rods moved out of the way where you're not going to catch them. I don't need to practice cast my underarm swings because we know there's one rod in close on an underarm swing, another rod in on an underarm swing, but obviously the one that's further out at the weed, which is about 30 yards out, a couple of practice casts at this stage won't go amiss. Again, it's horses for courses. As you can see here, I'm using a 3.5 or a 4 ounce bomb and the rod tip's not moving at all. That's no problem, but if you're using a softer rod, it can move. It's a question of finding your own style. Rod back, making sure there's nothing behind me, and cast. As it gets near the target, feather back, probably a little bit too far. Did you see how the rod tip kicked there? What I did, I dropped into the weed. Yeah, the rod tip's kicking round. There's some weed round the lead. Now, if I'd actually had a presentation on there, that's a hook bait, a hair and a hook, that probably would have snagged up in the weed. At best, my hook bait would have come off and I had to retie one. At worst, it could have all snarled up and I would have had to pull for a break. Not a good idea. Let's make sure that next time I drop it a bit closer in. Over the head again, simple lob, feather back, spot on, boom. Again, this time I felt the rod tip give a little kick as the lead landed on a clear spot in the clay, yes. You can feel that nicely. That's the spot to be in tonight. Again, that's only taken me 2 casts, but if you haven't got the experience that I've got, it may take you a lot more. Don't worry, recasting will not scare the fish off too much as long as you don't keep doing it when you've got your baits out in position. Don't keep recasting every half an hour. A couple of practice casts, bait in position, and a covering of ground bait or boilies is sufficient. Then sit back and enjoy it. I've been having trouble getting this right-hand rod onto a total clear spot. So I've walked round to the gap and I'm going to put my marker float out from here and lead around from here. I was having problems before, even the marker popping up. I'm hoping it'll pop up now. Should be there it is. I've got approximately 5 foot there of depth. I brought my leading rod with me, and because it's only a short range lob, it's easy for me to find those clear spots from here. Underarm lob, just past the lead, feather it back, boom, thump the bottom. It's so much easier to lead a marker float when you're only a couple of yards from the bank. Now I know my marker's in the right place now. I know that I need to be dropping a couple of yards short of that, and I know that's a big clear spot. Right, back to the bank and get the rod out. Right, I know where the rods are going, and I now have to decide which presentation and which end tackle to use. Now, as you could see from my casting out, I've already got some leads set up, some end tackles tied up. But you must never be a slave to what is on the end of your line just because it worked last week. It might not work this week. So always be prepared to change leads, to get rid of anti-tangle tube, to change lead designs, lead shapes, and to vary things so that it works best for the water you're fishing and the swim that you're in. It might have worked in a certain swim last week, but what is going to work tonight? Let's have a look at the lead setup I've got. This is the setup that I'm currently using. As you can see, I'm using a 4 ounce Corda lead. It's coated in green camouflage. I've got the rig sleeve there to stop it tangling, and then I've got 12 inches of armour tube. Now this is ideal for the swim I'm fishing in that I don't want to lose fish against the pads. The line I'm using is 14 pound Berkeley XT, so I've got a good line. I've got the last 12 inches tangle tubing which will stop me getting cut off, and I've got a lead about the right size. Now if I was fishing at extreme range, I'd have no hesitation at all in changing this 4 ounce for a 5 ounce lead. if I was fishing close in on a very hard bottom, I'd have no hesitation at all in changing my lead designs. We probably need a flat line, a pair. This gives more grip on the bottom. Again, don't just cast out what you've got tied on your end tackle if it's not ideal for the situation you're in. I'm lucky these 3 presentations will actually suit the rig, the swim I'm fishing, so we'll stick with those. As you can see from these rig boards, I have plenty of presentations tied up in advance. The last thing I want to be doing is tying up a rig on the bank. I'm quite lucky here because I've got a variety of presentations. Let's start at the left-hand side. As you can see here, I've got the snakeskin rig, 2 inches of hinge of the combi link and 12 inches of the snakeskin outer. That'll be ideal for one rod. Starting here, we've got the double loop rig. This is a stiff rig. We've got a loop at one end, and when we attach it to the lead, we'll use a loop as well. It gives it that hinge of free movement, and it's just a question of putting your bottom bait on. Those will do for the 2 clear spots. And finally, I've got various hooks tied up here. These are size 4 hooks. These are the Fox Series 1 size 4. We're using 25-pound Merlin because we're fishing tight to weed, and we're going to we've tied it on with a no knot. All we need to do now is put a dental floss hair on, put the pop-up bait on, secure it and pop it up 2 inches off the bottom. Again, if I hadn't tied all these up, I'd have to sit round for the next half an hour tying up various presentations. That's fishing time wasted, and that's fishing time that I can't afford to waste on these short sessions. So let's get these rods set up. Let's look at the setup now that we're using in relation to the indicators. Carp are, in my opinion, on very pressurised waters, scared of tight lines. A tight line in the water, especially around the hook bait, will spook the carp. Obviously, by using this anti-tangle tube, and it sinks the lines down somewhat, by having this barrel ledger, when you cast out, the barrel runs back probably somewhere in the region of 3 to 4 feet. That sinks the last 3 or 4 feet of line down well out of the baited area. So that's an idea, especially when you're a carp have been pressurised for some time. Let's now cast this out and see how we're actually setting the buzzers up. As you can see, I've put out my 3rd and final bait for the night. I felt it hit the bottom, so it's in the right place. I've tightened up by hand to the lead, but the last thing I want to do is move that lead. So the first thing I do is undo my clutch. This means I can pay line off the bait runner. You could, of course, click on your bait runner facility, but I don't use that. I'm using the clutch. So paying line off the clutch, making sure I've not tangled it, I'll put the rod down. Now I always like, pure out of superstition, to have all my handles the same height. I can feel that's tight to the lead, paying off line, paying off line, paying off line. Make sure the Velcro matches together. Clutch is in done, handles there. Now the next thing we need to do is clip on the swinger. Swinger is clipped on as so. Now unfortunately that line will be very, very tight around the baited area. So what I do, I keep paying off line as so until I've got a bit of slack out there. That is ideal now. Clip the line into the clip. Make sure there's no line twist. I then have all 3 the same. Make sure that your clutch is tightened up to the right level so that when you get a take, line will pull off the clutch, but you won't lose your rod. Also essential, make sure all 3 buzzers are on. All 3 handles set the same, all 3 clutches undone, and now I'm fishing and it's up to the carp. When using pop-ups, the last thing you want to do is break the centre of the skin of the pop-up by piercing it with a baiting needle. So obviously to hair the rig on, hair the bait on, the last thing you want to do is use a baiting needle. So instead of doing that, we tie what is known as a hair loop. All this is a simple grinner knot, 4 or 5 turns. We're using the Fox dental floss, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's your grinner knot. You then take your pop-up and slide that loop down round it. Quite fiddly to do at first, but with a bit of practice, the important bit is when you get to it tightening up against it. Find a flat area, tease it round, and pull tight. Now, with that being a loop, a grinner knot loop, it cannot slacken, it can only tighten up. When you cast out bait out in the water, the pop-up will swell slightly, the knot will become tighter, and it will never ever come off. And when you attach it to your hook length with the hair as so, that pop-up will stay up days because the skin has not been broken. Just enough there of a hinge to pull the hook into the carp's mouth. One of the great advances in carp fishing recently has been the use of PVA. One time it was just PVA stringers, and now you've got everything: PVA tape, PVA bags, PVA string, PVA tubes. This is the Fox Network PVA tape. This is what I use for stringers. We all know what a stringer is. PVA string unfortunately doesn't melt quite as well because it's tightly wound. By using PVA tape, there's more of a weave to it, more area for the water to come into contact, and it dissolves quicker. So that's a good idea. Everybody who goes carp fishing must have heard of the PVA bag. Now, this is when you can put a pile of free offerings tight to your hook bait. Now, these are the Fox PVA network bags. As you can see, almost like a lady's stocking. Not like Julie's, but almost. Snip off the bottom, unroll, drop all your free offerings in there, seal the top, just put it through there. You'll then have a bag of PVA offerings tight to your hook bait. An excellent idea. Now, as well as the stocking type bags, for longer range casting you don't want to be using the stocking type bags because they tend to explode a little. What you need to use then are the original PVA bags. These actually look like PVA bags. Got one here. As you see, just like a PVA hold all. A lot tougher. Again, you fill with your free offerings. That could be crumb, chopped up boilies, bits of ground bait or whatever. Twist it, seal it, cast it out. One good little tip is to put your baiting needle through here probably half a dozen times. This means that when it goes down, it doesn't float to the surface or try to float to the surface. It'll actually sink down as well. They're more resilient to long-range casting. An excellent idea. Okay, James, are you sure we're going to miss this rain?
Oh yeah.
Well, this is a turn up for the book. I can hardly hear myself talk. The weatherman promised me a hot, still, calm night. And look what I've got. I've got the monsoons coming here. I really hope that isn't a take. I hope that's just water on the line. You can never predict with carp fishing, and that's the beauty of carp fishing. I've set myself up in a swim on what I thought was the best information I had for the weather forecaster. Let's get that Ulrika back from Gladiators. She certainly did a better job than Michael Fish. I hope this rain stops. If it gets too cool, the fish will pull out of this area. It looks like a passing squall. I certainly hope so. If you look down close to the buzzers, see how effective that rod mat is. There's absolutely no splashback of mud, dirt or grime. All the water is trapped on the mat and the indicators are free to leap upwards. Let's keep my fingers crossed and hope a big one comes along tonight. Luckily it's covered in weed, which might stop it scrapping so much, which is often a problem with these fish. As you can see, deep margins. Don't want it to go particularly to the right. Lots of weed on the bottom here as well. Still trying to get in that weed. I don't want it to do that. Unfortunately, it got covered in weed early on and has now realised it's time to fight again. Now, lots of people say they like to play carp for hours on end. I have to say, I like them in the net. That doesn't quite want to go in the net yet, and I don't want it to go in those pads either. And I don't want it to get in those pads because they're absolute sods. Even really good line like this XT, they will cut. And yes, it's in the net. Decent fish, yes. Lovely fish. Yes, we got ourselves a, whoa, I think we're talking about a 20-pounder there. Lovely scattered mirror here. Before I start handling it, I'll get my hands nice and wet. They don't like the touch of warm hands upon them, so it's nice and wet. Just a nice covering of water. Make sure it doesn't go down the gills, you don't want to drown them. Just enough to wet them. Remember, they're out of their environment. About 18 pounds, no need to weigh this one, but what a beautiful fish. Look at those scales. Again, when you're holding fish up for photographs, keep them nice and low. The higher they are, the more likely they are to flip out of your hands. Keep them nice and firmly, support their organs. It's a beautiful fish, this. About 18 or 19 pounds. Let's have a look at the other side as well. So it's worth, when you're photographing fish, keeping a record of both sides. Now this is a very distinctive fish and you're probably not going to get two like this. Look at the colours there, yellow. Autumnal colours coming through there. He's not actually shed any bait. See how essential it is to have the landing net and the unhooking mat together. Stops it going anywhere. Again, nice and wet. Even got even got my kettle there for extra water. Again, look at that. Look at that. So he wants to shake free. Keep him nice and low, or her nice and low. What a lovely fish. About 18 pounds or so. Thank you very much. You've made my day. Isn't that a beauty? That's what we're doing it for. Nice and careful into water. Now then, bring your mum, or if he's a big male, your dad, and off it goes. Preparation and planning are the key to success in fishing for carp, be they big carp, small carp or whatever. It's getting on for 9 o'clock, the light's starting to fade, and odd fish are starting to show in front of me. I'll just take you through some of the precaution I've taken for the night. Bearing in mind the heavy rain we had earlier, I've checked my buzzers and made sure they're working perfectly. Each buzzer is switched on. I've seen so many people switch the buzzers off and then forget to switch them on. A violent take and they lose the fish before they know they've got it on. I've checked that each rod is in the central holder and not likely to move. Indicators clipped on properly. Rear line clip. And as you can see, I've wiped the reel down. I've made sure the clutches are set perfectly, so if I do get a take at night, the rod's not going to go in, but there's sufficient pressure to stop the carp getting into the lilies. Each rod is held securely in the Velcro. That's not going to go anywhere. The last thing I'm going to do at night is put my own shoes on, tie them up and walk to the rods. I'm going to dash straight out when I get a take. I've got these cut down wellies here and it allows me to put my feet straight into these and not worry about having to tie my laces up. Sometimes I have to go in the water. I don't want to be getting into the water in bare feet, so these allow me to jump straight into them. Just cut down wellies or waders. I've got a torch here. I always use a torch for landing fish at night. Again, I'm blind as a bat. I need a torch to see where the fish are at night. I don't think it scares a carp, providing you don't shine it directly into their eyes. Shine it along the water and draw them into it. The landing net is positioned so that whether I get a fish on the left rod, the middle rod or the right hand rod, I can get hold of it. I've seen people put these in the bushes and on the wrong side, well down to the left hand side or the right hand side. They get a take and they're trying to pull the landing net out of the bushes, and that way they can lose fish. So make sure that the landing net is in the right position. The rods are tucked behind the bivvy, the spare rods, so they're not going to get stolen at night. As you can see from the sleeping bag, the zip is on the right hand side, so when I get a take at night I can burst straight out of it down to my rods. I use a Coleman stove for most of my fishing. Obviously in the next half an hour or so I'm going to fill the flask up. That'll be full to the top. That saves me having to get the Coleman going in the middle of the night, first thing in the morning. All that will save me time. And then I've got my little box of tricks here. Alarm clock, I'll set that for 4:30 tomorrow morning so that I'll be able to see any fish moving at first light. Spare torch, large torch, mobile phone if I get into difficulties, spare lighter, binoculars, glasses and the DXR box. Now what this is the remote that goes with the DXR buzzers. All you do is turn your buzzers down at night, switch this on to full, and it's a remote extension box. Absolutely brilliant. You can also walk a couple of yards up the bank if you're going to the toilet or whatever and not worry about getting bleeps on your rod and not noticing it. I'm sure I'm going to get a fish tonight, so I've prepared in advance. I've got the unhooking mat here and I've got the weigh sling. If I catch a fish, I want the fish up on here on the unhooking mat and in the weigh sling straight away. Sweeping across, I've got this set up for my camera. There's a lad further down the bank, but I don't really want to trouble him unless I have to do. Forceps, wire cutters, cloth. If I catch a carp in the middle of the night, I'm ready to deal with it straight away. I'm not messing about. All this planning will actually save you a lot of time in the long run. People say to me, well, what do you do now? Do you go to sleep? Do you start reading or whatever? No. The last thing you want to do is start reading magazines, chatting to other anglers, getting your head down for the night. You'll miss fish movement. Now at this time of night it's going to be very difficult for me to move on to fish, but it might tell me where they are tomorrow. So I'll stay up as late as possible and I'll get up as early as possible. Every last minute, every last hour is essential for fish viewing. So let's get back to the water and watch for those fish. One last little tip. I always like to pay the water for a fish. I always have a penny with me. And I like to give the fish the dues. 9 o'clock at night, just getting dark. About 10 minutes or so, I've picked up a fish. Looks like a small common, probably somewhere between 8 and 10 pounds. there was obviously running out of light, and you can actually see the boil in the carp's mouth. What I did is I just snipped the trace off, tied a new one on. I'd already got the bait balanced and cast it out. Took no more than probably 3 or 4 minutes. That way I've got the bait in position before the light's fallen, the carp's in the landing net. All I need to do, take it up the bank, unhook it. I don't think we'll bother with a photograph, but no harm to the carp at all. And we've got the baits in the position to see if we can catch another one tonight. So let's just unhook her, take her up the bank, take the hook out, and we're still fishing. Straight in the bottom lip, that. A confident feeder, that's an overshotted pop-up. Very, very secure hook hold. Forceps round it, tease it out, dead easy. It's a lovely fish, just put those out. Look at that, what a gorgeous little common. And who's to know, in 10 years' time, that might be a 20-pounder. Again, absolutely scale perfect. Oh, lovely fish. Right, let's put you back, and let's hope your mother comes along. Fish. They look beautiful. That's our future. Just going back now. Go on. Amazing. Straight into the pads. Excellent. Let's see if we can catch another one. Come here. Oh, it's another, believe it or not, it's another common. It's another common. Here you go. Oh, you won't have it. Get in. Very secure hook hold. Let's get the... One thing you have to be careful with when unhooking fish is you grab the hook with the forceps. 2 commons in one night out of the 4 or maybe 5 that are in this lake. Unbelievable. Lovely paddle on it. It's fighting more now than it did in the water. There we go. Oh. Let's put him back now. Let's get the fish back before we cause any damage to it. Ooh. Nice and lively. Not quite yet. Let's get this off your nose. There we go. What a beautiful fish. Oh, they look glorious. Kiting back right into the weed. In the morning, had a fish at 1:30, 22.8, lost one, 3:45 in the pads. It's taken me about half an hour to get all the rods back into position. Got about an hour and a half now before I go to work. Spend some time looking for the fish. One thing I do every morning before I leave is try and put some free bait out for the fish. Got about 4 pounds of bait left to put out for the fish. I usually tend to put it out in spots I know where the fish are. In this case, there's a lot of fish being shown to my right-hand side in the lilies. I'll put bait out there before I leave. I'll put some out in the cut through and I'll put some out to my left. Even if I don't fish the swim tomorrow or the day after, I certainly know there's fish here at the moment, so they're going to get a taste of the bait for free. Always improves your chances in the long run. Nothing left to do now except watch the water for an hour and a half. Hope something comes true. And perhaps rub the troll's head. Hope for a bit of luck. Hello, Mr. Troll. 6:15, just before I'm about to pack up for work. And I've hit another fish, very strong fighting fish. Picked it up on that rod I recast this morning towards the pads. just goes to show that you never can tell when you're going to get another take. Always worth very strong fighting in the margins. Problem with this water is there are deep margins full of weed. As you can see, the fish know exactly where to go when you've got a take. Now, I'm going to use my common sense and try and lead it in. Clearly, I don't want it to go the right-hand side. It's very heavily padded on the right. Again, it knows where those snags are. Always keep down out of the skyline when you're playing fish. As you can see, if you get too far up, it scares and spooks the fish, which is the last thing I want at this stage of the fight. Quite a nice fish. Almost ready for the net, but not quite. Picking up bits of debris, but still not ready for the net. And I'm just getting a boot full of water here, but never mind. Obviously this bit of rain has persuaded the carp that perhaps it was time to feed. Still wants to be in those pads. The clear water, of course, in the day doesn't help you with netting fish, in that your landing net stands out terribly. The carp can see it and can see you. It's still quite a strong fish. Weakening a bit now. I'm managing to turn it every time it gets towards the pads. Come on, in you go, and into the net. Well, we have a nice fish. And good double, possibly even a 20-pounder. Unfortunately, I'm going to be very wet on the way home to work. The important thing is we didn't lose the fish. Nice fish. Good thing about these landing nets, you don't need to mess about. Over, clip. Landing net pole out of the way. We're ready to lift the back fish up to the unhooking mat. Oh, that's a nice fish. Nice mirror. See how important it is to have the net already here. Forceps, cutters if necessary. Let's see what we've got. Yep. A beautiful mirror. That's well hooked. You can see it's a pop-up and the fish is taking it into the back of the throat there. And what we need to do is use the forceps. Now, I've seen too many people try and wiggle hooks out without forceps. But see how easy that was with forceps? Before you pull the lead from under a fish, always make sure you know exactly where it is. That line is still caught around the fish. The last thing we want to do is pull it and take a scale off the fish. There we go. Always be careful that you put your baited rig out the way. Got a fish there, probably not quite as big as I first expected. I would expect that to be about 15 or 16 pound. It's a nice fish, beautiful condition. You can see how it's been grubbing along in the bottom there. Its mouth darkened, been caught once or twice before. In fact, it was hooked in the bottom lip not so long ago. Lovely condition fish, absolutely beautiful yellow colours there. And I think we'll just get our friend next door to do a picture. No need to weigh this. It's about 15 or 16 pounds. I'll just put it in the side with the landing net and get our friend to do a few pictures next door for me. Again, as soon as they've had a bit of time to recover, they want to start fighting you, as this one does. There we go. Imagine what they're like after they've been sacked up overnight. No wonder we banned sacks. There we go. I always take probably 2 or 3 of each side to make sure I've got one absolutely spot on. And a couple of horizontals as well. Doesn't harm them keeping them out of water for a couple of slides, as long as you're careful with them. This fish is nice and wet. We'll do the other side as well. We've got a nice record to see how big this fish grows. I'm sure this one day will grow to be a nice, fat 20-pounder. Again, with it being a little bit dark this morning, we're having to use flash photography just to light the fish up. In quite nice condition. 1 or 2 leeches on it, which I'll take off before I put it away. And luckily no damage from the line. Sometimes when you're playing the fish in, the line will catch around the fins and take scales off, but been quite lucky there. It's in nice condition. Lovely, just 1 or 2 leeches. Take those off. And now I can put her back, or him back, to fight another day. Never ever carry them back to the water in your hands cradled. They can easily slip out of your hands, and when you're talking about a drop of about 6 feet, you'll kill them, or at best break their internal organs. By carrying them in the net, you're always supporting them. And even if they do wriggle, you're not going to drop them. Well, I've already had one soaking, so another one doesn't really matter. And there we have the end of the session. That's what it's all about. A nice healthy double. There it goes. To live and fight another day. Another nice fish and the end of a session. Again, looks quite easy, doesn't it? I've done nothing different than you can do. Have a great time. Hope you enjoyed it. See you soon. Tight lines.